Hello everyone, this is Aaron. In this tutorial, I'm going to walk you through the process of installing Tool Sai and show you the basics of how the program works. There's quite a bit of content I'll be covering with this video, so feel free to stop once you've successfully installed the program and signed up for your free trial. The tutorial will still be available for you once you have need of it during our classes. If you're participating in the whole 4-week camp, or even just week 3 specifically, you'll be introduced to Photoshop by Adrielle and go through the process of creating some game art assets with it. Photoshop is an industry standard in the various fields of digital illustration, and while it is a very useful and comprehensive tool, it can also be quite expensive. Even with a student license, the Adobe Creative Cloud Software Hub, which Photoshop is a part of, costs about $30 a month. During week 3 of this camp, you'll have the opportunity to utilize the free 1-week trial version of the program. For the first 2 weeks, however, we wanted to make sure you would still have access to another digital illustration program to get you started. That's where Tool Sai comes in. I've been using the first edition of Sai almost daily for the past 10 years, and I cannot overstate how much I love this program. It has a very simple and easy-to-use interface, which was great for getting used to the jump between traditional and digital art. It also has excellent pen pressure settings, a solid selection of standard tools, and some compatibility options that will help you transfer your art files into Photoshop during week 3. Now that I've bragged about how great this program is, let's go through the process of downloading the 30-day free trial version so you'll have access to it when you come in on week 1. If you find that you like the program and would like to purchase the full version after your trial is up, I definitely think it is worth the one-time buy of around $80. So let's get to it. You'll just want to Google Tool Sai, and this first link should pop up. The program is created by Systemax, so just make sure that you have the correct one. The one problem that I can see some of you running into is that if you have a Mac rather than a PC, I don't know if there's actually a version of Tool Sai that you'll be able to use. Let's actually go down here and see. Yeah, it says that it only has Windows, so you can only use Tool Sai if you have a PC. If that's the case, we are going to make sure that there are other options for Mac users. There's a great many art programs that you can download from the internet that also offer free trial versions, so we'll definitely be able to figure something out for you. So let's go ahead and start the install. So before we actually install the program, we'll want to click on that software license agreement. Okay, yes. Actually want to go ahead, and since I already have Sai, I'm going to create a new folder. Actually, I think if I just give it a different name, we should be okay. Okay, nice and easy installation. So now let me open this program up. Tool Sai. I believe that it's this one. Let me drag the icon over here so that we have it. Yep, we can see it highlighted there that it is the version 2 that I downloaded. So let's go ahead and open this up. Okay. Now something that you guys didn't see, just because it was pretty quick when it popped up and I had to move it to my other window here, is that it just shows you a little window when you open it that says that you're using the trial version and to please purchase the version with the license agreement. 30-day, or excuse me, the full version of the product. I'm going to take note of these cautions really quick. All right. So since I have already purchased my own license agreement, I do believe that's why it says up here that my trial period expired, because my trial a long time ago that I had expired. So it might not be exactly the same here. However, if that's the case and anybody has any problems, I'm sure that we can work them out in class together. All right, now that we've got our program all set up, let's explore the interface a bit. Just like many other digital art programs, Sai has some customization available for the menu layout. There are two menu areas that you'll need to use the program properly: the Tool menu and the Layer/Navigation menu. These two menus are made up of several submenus that you can turn off and on by going into the Window tab up here. While I encourage you to mess around with these menus and come up with a layout that you like, I'm going to show you how I set mine up. Using the Window tool, we can go down toward the bottom, and we can select everything going to the right or left, depending on how you like it. Personally, this is what I prefer. I don't like my canvas to be surrounded by the interface on all sides. That's why I like these menus to be pushed onto the left side of my screen. And I think part of the reason I like this setup is because I'm right-handed, so by having the menus on the left side of the canvas, I'm able to have greater mobility of my drawing hand. Now, let's go through the submenus that I like to have active. I'll also touch on the ones that I don't personally use a lot, but I'll be going more in-depth with the menus that I use most often. We'll start with the menu that you'll be interacting with the most, which is the Tool menu. Up here at the top, you'll notice several color-related options. The first one is the color wheel. So you can see that's this one right here. Size color wheel is nice because it includes the actual wheel, showing you the positional relationships of the colors, just like a traditional wheel. I'm sure most of you will be quite familiar with this, as pretty much every introductory art class will have you work with a color wheel. Hence, that's why I really like the circular design, just because if you've learned about the color wheel already, you'll know that the position of all of these colors is a great way to indicate which ones will look good together. It'll also help you put together cohesive color palettes. Adriel is going to go over color theory a little bit more during week 3, but I just thought I would talk about that a little bit here. Additionally, it also has a tint and saturation square here in the middle. You can change the values of the colors you select within the wheel. So this outer wheel here shows you like the maxed out, like the highest tint, highest saturation. Well, not highest tint, obviously, because the highest tint would be white, but the highest saturation value upper in this upper right corner, that's what you'll be selecting out here with the wheel. And then with the tint and saturation square, you can actually modify how light or dark the color is with this one here, and how saturated it is with this one here. So the second menu option here is the RGB slider, which I will toggle on and off so you can kind of see that. This isn't one that I use a lot, but it's worth mentioning. Adriel will be going more in detail with what exactly RGB is during the third week. The third is the HSV slider, which is this one here. I like to have this one active. Similar to RGB, HSV is a matrix that measures 3 qualities of the colors you'll be selecting. It stands for hue, saturation, and value. Essentially, this tool can replace your color wheel because it offers the same modification settings. However, I like to have both of them active so that I can make more informed decisions about my color selections using the wheel before I modify the colors themselves with the slider. The remaining color options are not ones that I personally use, so we'll go through them more quickly. There is the color mixer, the swatch menu, and the scratch pad. I do use the scratch pad sometimes when I want to save a particular color without having to use the eyedropper tool to track down the color on my canvas. So basically how that works is you can use any tool pretty much up here. I don't know if the bucket tool will work. It will not. Okay, so any of your pen tools you can use with the swatch pad, and you can just do a little swatch. We'll do a couple just to kind of show you. So now that they are in my swatch pad, if I close out of it and open it back up, they're going to stay there. And you can also undo, redo, and erase. Now that we have our color settings figured out, let's talk about the rest of the tools available here. We have our 3 selection tools. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and open up a new canvas using the File menu just so we can start doing that. When you open up a new canvas, it will always ask you to name it if you want. You don't have to name it right away. You can name it when you save it. And then you can choose the dimensions of the canvas here. Let's just go ahead and do like standard 1000 by 1000. It defaults to a resolution of 72 pixels per inch, which is a pretty good resolution, I think. I don't know why you would have to go any higher. I never do, so. You can also change the width and height from pixels to inches, centimeters, or millimeters. I usually just do pixels. We have our 3 selection tools here. The rectangle selector, which is just a standard box selection tool. If you hold down Shift, you can see that there adds a little plus sign to your cursor. That just means that it's going to add to your selection like this. Make sure to keep holding it down. Okay, that's how you do that. You can just click to clear your selection. Or you can also use Control D. I'll be providing a list of handy keyboard shortcuts in the description of the tutorial. So next we have the lasso tool, which is just kind of a freeform selection. Pretty useful. I don't really use this one a whole lot just because I personally like the selection pen better, which is actually a pen that acts as a selector. So once I exit out of the tool, you'll see that I have the dotted lines that are indicating that I've selected this area. And then we have the magic wand, which I will show you briefly how this works. So say you have a little black circle, you poke it with the magic wand, and it's not super strict. I have it on strict right now. You can change some of the detection modes here. Yeah, this isn't really one that I use a lot either. It's not very sensitive, but I do believe it works better selecting the white than it does the color. The next row of tools have to do more with how you interact with your drawings in relation to the canvas. So we have the Move tool, which you can just scooch your little circle around using that. You have the magnifying glass, which allows you to zoom in. The unfortunate thing about this tool is that there isn't a way for you to zoom out using it, so you just have to kind of pop up to the top here to zoom back out. You'll want to be careful when you use the magnifying glass tool, because if you actually drag it, it'll zoom in really far. Next we have the rotate tool, which rotates the entire canvas. You can see our angle changing degrees up here. I really like the rotate tool because when I draw traditionally, I am constantly rotating my paper or canvas, so it's really handy to have this as an option for a digital canvas. Next, we have the hand tool, which allows you to change your view position on the canvas, just like you would be using these sliders, but instead of having to go all the way to the outer screen, you just have to click and drag on your canvas and you can scooch around. And finally, we have the all-important eyedropper tool, which if you're not familiar with this, it's a very good tool to have just because it lets you switch your colors very easily. Whatever color the pixel is that the eyedropper tool is touching, that's the color that it'll take on in your little swatch over here. All of these tools can be assigned to keyboard shortcuts to help save you some time. So let me quickly show you how to do that. It's quite easy. All you need to do is double click on the tool and it will pop up. So you can see the shortcut key down here. So if I were to press a selected key already assigned, no. So if I were to go to brush, and you saw that the keyboard shortcut was N, so when I press N, I'm back at the pen. So once you've assigned your shortcut, all you have to do is press and hold that key as you saw to use that tool. Some of the tools, like the pen tool, won't require you to hold down the key the entire time, but others will. So be mindful of that when you use these shortcuts. For example, some of the tools that require you to hold things down would be like the hand tool or the rotate tool. Okay, and over here you can see our two color selection boxes. Just like in Photoshop, you can switch between them by pressing X. Very handy. Just as a general rule, I like to keep it white just because I switch between the color and white pretty often. But obviously you can use these however you feel you'd like to use them. And right underneath the two color selections we have here is this handy dandy tool, which is exchange the normal for transparency. So it basically turns whatever tool you have selected into a version that can be used to take away from the canvas rather than add. So I've got my pen tool selected right now, for example, and as you can see, when it's not selected, I can draw just pretty normally. When I select it, the pen stays the same. It has the same settings, but instead, it erases, which is very, very handy. And to go back to the normal setting, you just unclick it. Now we can talk about the many pen tools. We have the standard pen, which I've been using so far. My personal favorite, which is the Airbrush. Personally, I don't love the way that it's set up initially, so I'll show you how I modify it to get the settings that I like to use a little bit later on. Then we have the brush tool. It's more blendy than the other two, for sure. Then we have the watercolor tool, which is also very blendy. The marker. The eraser, which is pretty self-explanatory. And I already kind of went over the selection pen. It just basically selects whatever you draw on with this nice blue indicator. What's nice is that we also have a selection eraser, so if you don't want everything you've selected, you can actually erase selection like that. Then we have the paint bucket tool, which you can just kind of fill your whole canvas with color using that. And then the legacy pen, which allows you to draw in hard pixels just like you would in MS Paint. Let me show you. It's kind of hard to see, so I'm going to zoom in. But as you can see, they are very MS Paint-like. And down here we have a few more tools. And these tools have some unique textures applied to them. We have the canvas tool, which by itself, if you don't modify it, is not that impressive. Here's where you can go down and actually select some nice textures here. So I'll do canvas. And as you can see, it looks like, from the little edges, like you're drawing on a real canvas. And then the paper one, if you apply the paper texture, I don't use these ones all that often, but I do feel like they're worth mentioning. The crown one, I find it works best with the paper. Yeah. So once you apply the paper, you get a very, very fun texture here I like to use this a lot for more whimsical childlike drawings that I'll do. And then we have the blur tool, which is also fairly self-explanatory. It just blurs the colors that you have on your current layer. All of these tools can be customized to your preferences with the settings that pop up when you click on them. So like I said earlier, the Airbrush tool is actually my favorite, but I don't like the way that it's set up at first. It's not very impressive all on its own. It's got a nice, unique thing going on here, but it's not what I like to use. It's not how I use this tool normally. So let me show you how to customize it a little bit. You can change the hardness. This is the one that I like to use the most. You can obviously change the size, the minimum size, which I will actually push down to about 10%. The density, I like to pull up to about 80. This is where I find it sits the best. Yeah, there we go. The reason I like this tool is because it has such a soft look to it. The pen is just so hard. I'm just not a big fan of it, even when it's like that. It's just not ideal. It's a little more intimidating for me to work with the pen just because the strokes are so hard and final versus the airbrush. They're just a little bit more soft. It feels more like a real pen to me rather than a digital pen. You can also change some qualities of it and even apply a texture to it if you want. So here are some different qualities. A nice spread. Kind of looks like paint spreading over a canvas. You can do spread and noise, which is really fun. You can do a bristle. You can do a flat bristle. I don't use these a whole lot, but I'm sure that you would have a lot of fun playing with them. And again, you can apply some textures to these as well. There are also some more advanced customization options in this little menu down here. But I find that size presets are usually adequate, so I rarely mess around with the advanced settings. If you're not comfortable with it, I definitely wouldn't touch it. Now that you know about all of the tool menu options, let's talk briefly about the layer and navigation menu over here. So up here at the top, you can see the navigation menu. This menu shows you a tiny preview of your canvas with a dotted red square indicating the current location of your view in relation to the whole canvas. So as you can see, when I zoom in, you can see this little square get a little bit smaller. This is my view of my current screen. So I can also move around the canvas using this little square. It's just a nice little handy way to pop around if you have a specific spot on your canvas that you want to edit, but you don't want to zoom all the way out to find it. It also has some zoom and angle settings, but you don't need to worry about those. Mess with them if you'd like, but I don't use them a lot personally. And the rest of these settings relate to the current layer you have selected. So as you can see, when you first open a new canvas in Sai, it gives you the first layer. By default, any new layer will act as a normal layer until you customize it. You can see the normal underneath indicating that this is a normal layer. So this paint effects this is the paint effect submenu, but you don't need to worry about this one right now. This is the mode selector, where you can start making changes to the type of layer that you want your current layer selection to have. You can change it from normal to multiply. Let me show you what exactly that does. To really appreciate the multiply, you need to have a layer underneath it. So as you can see, I added a new layer, and I'm changing this new layer to multiply. And even though I'm using the same color, it's going to act different on top of the layer underneath it. So it'll be the same color on the outside of this purple, just because there's nothing underneath it that would make it darker, like there is in this little circle. You can also change it to screen, which changes it to more of a highlight. You can do overlay, which I don't use a lot because it doesn't appear super different to me. And luminosity essentially does the same thing as the screen, but it also increases the saturation and intensifies the brightness of your color of the highlight here. You can also change it to shade, which, like the luminosity to the screen, does a darker version of the multiply. You can also do Lumi and shade. I don't use this one a whole lot personally. And then you can do binary color, which is just black. I believe it is also pixelated. It is. Feel free to mess around with these layers to figure out which ones you'd like to use. Personally, I use the normal multiply and screen layer types most often. Next, we have some additional layer settings right here. So the preserve opacity, let me show you how that works. So you've got this, on your layer. And when you don't have preserve opacity, you can pretty much draw wherever you want on the layer until you click it. And I will show you with a different color. It only lets you draw in the space you've already drawn on in the layer. One important thing to note is that I will actually show you this with a layer underneath it. If you try to erase on a preserve opacity locked layer, it will show up as white. So definitely be careful when you're erasing to make sure that you have deselected preserve opacity, and then you can get rid of it like normal. The clipping group right here is a fun one. How it works is that it will only let you draw on the same area that has already been drawn out on the layer beneath it, which is super helpful when you want to add some shading or highlights to the base colors of a drawing. Let me show you how that works. Okay. Just so this will show up on black, I'm going to change this to a screen type layer and then change it to a clipping source. As you can see, I'm only able to draw on top of the black that is already underneath. You can also apply multiple clipping sources and it will still draw its selection from the layer underneath the first clipping source, which is super handy. Finally, we have the selection source option. This is a little bit different. It's most relevant to the paint bucket tool. Let me show you how that works. Whenever I do line art and I don't want to spend a lot of time coloring it by hand, like this, it can be rather tedious. So a solution to that is when you select the paint bucket tool, you can change the paint bucket tool's target from the working layer, which would just color the entire layer, to the selection source. Very handy. On this top row, we have the Add Layer button, which I've been using a lot throughout this tutorial so far. Just adding layers. You can drag and drop them to reposition them. We also have the Vector Line layer, which we don't really need to worry about that much. It has some different layer settings that are more related to line manipulation. I'll briefly show you how that works. So I've drawn a line. Use the Edit tool. I can add vertices to my line to move it around. This is handy if you're more into graphic design and you don't really want to hand draw all of your lines. But I like to hand draw my lines, so I don't use this a whole lot unless I need a perfectly straight line. And then we also have the folder button, and I will show you why this button is so handy. It took me forever to figure out why exactly I should use it, but let me show you. So one thing to note is that you can't draw just on a folder because it's not a layer. You can only draw on layers. So We'll draw on layer 1, and then we'll draw on layer 2. Now, when I move, and I have layer 2 selected, it'll only move layer 2. When I have layer 1 selected, it'll only move layer 1. When I put both of these layers into this folder, and I select the folder, it will move both of the layers at the same time. This is really helpful for separating your images out into line art, colors, highlights, shades. You don't have to combine all of those into a single layer in order to move it around. You can just pop it into a folder instead. One thing to note is that when you have multiple layers inside of a folder, it won't let you delete it. It will only let you delete the folder if it only has one layer in it. Now let's talk about the bottom row. I'll need at least 2 layers to have access to all of these. The transfer down button allows you to combine the layer you have selected with the next layer beneath it while keeping the current layer active. Basically, it puts all of the content you've made on your current layer onto the layer beneath it in a way that you don't have to create a new layer after that. So let me show you how that will work. Drawing on layer 1. Let's get a nicer color, actually. I don't like that one. And then we draw on layer 2. Now, I don't know if you could catch that, but if you look really close, you can now see that on layer 1, it has both the purple and the blue showing. And my layer 2 is still up here. The merge down button, which is this one right here, lets you do the same thing, but it doesn't preserve the current layer. I like to use this one more often just because it's more obvious to me when I've combined my layers. The transfer down button can be tricky because it's easy to do it accidentally and not realize it. The merge down button makes it more clear that you've just combined your layers. So let me show you what I mean. Purple, pink, and merge down. So now we only have one layer. The eraser tool, which is right here, allows you to erase the content of your layer in a couple of different ways. If you don't have anything selected, it will erase the entire layer. Let me show you. So there's nothing selected here. If I click the erase, the whole layer goes. If I do select something, it will only erase what's in that selection. The delete layer is pretty self-explanatory. It just deletes the layer. And the 2 remaining buttons are ones that we won't be using in any of my site tutorials, so don't worry about them. Adrielle will explain more about layer masks in her Photoshop tutorials. Now I'd like to point out the tools and options that are directly above the canvas. So we have the undo and redo buttons, just to show you how that works. Undo, redo. Then we have the clear selection button, which let me show you how that works. It's, once you have something selected, it becomes active and you can just, boop, clear the selection. The invert selection button. See our little dotted square here, and how there's no dotted square on the outside because we're only selecting what's within the square. If you invert that selection, it selects everything outside of the square. Like that. I find it easier to just use the keyboard shortcuts for these. Then we have the selection showing trigger, which when selected makes it obvious what you have selected currently. So as you can see, when it's selected, you can see the little dotted lines. When you click it out, those dotted lines go away. We've got the zoom menu with all of its preset zooms. Pretty self-explanatory here. It just lets you zoom in without using the magnifying glass. Like that. We have the reset view translation right next to these zoom options. And this resets your view to show the whole canvas. Next up, we have some canvas rotation related tools. This first one has preset rotation points that increment by 45 degrees. The next two allow you to rotate the canvas counterclockwise or clockwise. The next button is similar to the Reset View Translation button from before, but it won't reset the view to show the whole canvas. Instead, it will just reset the rotation of the canvas back to 0 degrees without affecting the zoom itself. So let me show you. So as you can see, I've zoomed in, I'm at 200%, and I'm going to rotate it a little bit. Press this. I'm still at 200%, but now I'm back at 0 degrees. Next, we have the Invert button. It has a little name tag on it that indicates the version you have active. And what this does is it actually flips the canvas. So let me show you with something a little more compelling than a paint splotch. See what I mean? This is an extremely helpful tool that I highly recommend you utilize. If you have any drawing experience, you'll probably be able to relate to this problem. Your drawing looks good from one side, but when you flip it over, you find that it is leaning to one side, or something just looks off, or your drawing's proportions are just skewed to one side. If you flip your canvas often while you work, it will help to solve these problems. Whenever I draw, I usually flip the canvas, work on the drawing some more, and then flip it again, and so on and so on. I find it best to just regularly flip the canvas to make sure that it looks good, no matter how you view it. Finally, we can talk about the stabilizer. This has to do with pen pressure settings. For context, pen pressure has to do with how well a program detects the subtle differences in the amount of weight you press down onto your tablet with your pen. The higher the stabilizer value, the more sensitive your pen pressure detection will be. I usually work with the stabilizer at 10. Let me show you what it does exactly when you lower or increase its value. So here we have 10. Let's lower it down to 0. So it's just a little bit less sensitive. I don't quite have as much curve on my line, and it's not detecting those subtle movements that this higher stabilizer will. And you scooch it up to 15. It's much more sensitive. These S ones down here, I don't use very often, so I wouldn't worry about those. Lastly, we'll finish off the tutorial by discussing some of the options in the uppermost menu up here. All of these. I'm sure you're quite familiar with the typical options associated with the File drop-down menu. The one I'd like to point out is the various export options down here. Apart from the obvious .sai, which saves your canvas as a native Sai file, and the .png, which is the ideal export option for a static digital image, note the PSD export option. This will be very useful for you when we start to work more with Photoshop in week 3, because PSD files are to Photoshop what Sai files are to Sai. That's right, you can actually create an entire complex image in this program, export it as a PSD file, and open it in Photoshop. Now, not all of the settings will transfer perfectly, as they are two fairly different programs. So if you want to make use of this, I would try to make sure your layers have a normal value rather than a multiply screen, luminosity, etc. value. Let me quickly show you how you can preserve the visual quality of these different types of layers while converting them into normal layers. I have my multiply. All I have to do is make sure that the layer I'm merging it with underneath is normal, and it will convert it to a normal layer type. Boop, just like that. One thing to note is that since the multiply layer's properties are dependent on the layer beneath it, if I have just a normal layer that doesn't have anything on it underneath it and I merge it, it loses its values. So definitely keep that in mind as you're doing this. The Edit menu also contains some rather standard options, nothing abnormal that we need to worry about. The Canvas menu has some features that I would like to highlight. The first are the resizing options. Similar to how it looked when we first opened our canvas, you can actually change the width, height, change the way you're measuring this by percent, pixel, inch, centimeter, or millimeter. And the anchor basically describes how the canvas is going to change its size in relation to what it is right now. So if we have it like this, and I wanted to change it to 1500 by 1500, or whoop, not 15,000, it would just grow from all sides. If I only wanted it to grow outward from this little white square, then I would do it like this. It basically provides the anchor point for how the canvas is going to change its size. See what I mean? Another great feature that's found in the canvas menu that I use often is this handy option, crop by selection. Now it's not highlighted right now because I don't have anything selected, but let me show you what happens. See, I draw just my little selection there, go up here. Now the crop by selection tool is active, and boop, I can change the entire size of my canvas just to be what I have selected. Let me show you another way that I use this. So since all we have on this layer right now is just this little purple blop, the background is transparent by default. So when I move my selection around, as you can see over here, it changes to a floating selection, and it only has selected all of the pixels that I've drawn. When I go up here to crop by selection, it will crop everything into only detect the dimensions of the pixels that I actually drew. This is really, really useful for when you want to export pieces and parts of PNGs. The layer menu has pretty much all of the options that we already discussed in the lower layer menu over here. However, one feature of this menu that I use frequently is the luminance to transparency option. And what that does, let me show you. All right, so first I'm going to color all of this purple so that you can see that it is colored. I will switch to white, and I'm going to have a little bit of variance here just to show you. Now we can do luminance to transparency, and it will convert it to a grayscale layer. The luminance to transparency option converts the light pixels of your current layer into various levels of transparency. So if I draw underneath it, you can see what I mean. Since these pixels weren't fully black, you can still kind of see underneath them. And since these pixels were very white, they're fully transparent. Now, if I were to draw with black, it'll only show up on the lightest pixels, or rather where the lightest pixels used to be. As for the selection menu, the option that I use a lot is the increment selection. This is a great way to add a border to your drawing with ease, and let me show you how that works. The best way to use this is to not just settle for the rectangle selection, but to actually grab your whole object, go back up here to selection, and increment it. We'll increment it 5 times. And as you can see, the little dotted line is starting to extend past my object here. And then I'll change the color, put a layer underneath it, and boom, instant border. One thing to note is that unfortunately this incremental selection isn't perfect. The more you increment, the more pixelated it will get. So if you want a nice wide border, I would suggest using the increment selection option in combination with some hand-drawn touch-ups after the fact. Now, the filter menu has two important options: hue and saturation, and brightness and contrast. Let me show you how these work. Hue and saturation is the one that I use most often. Brings up a little pop-up menu, and I can change the color of my circle with ease. I can also change how saturated it is. And I can change how bright or dark it is. Now, the brightness and contrast menu is similar with some notable differences. The brightness increases without limiting the saturation. And the contrast, it's a little bit difficult to see with this one. Let me actually make something better to show you. So it basically makes the contrast between the colors on that layer a little bit more intense. This is really helpful when you're transferring a traditional drawing that's been scanned onto a digital canvas, because you can use the combination of the brightness and contrast and the luminance to transparency in order to basically take your scanned image and get rid of the opaque white background that most paper has, if that makes sense. The window menu lets you select the various menus to add to your interface. You can see the little check marks that indicate which ones we have active right now. But say I wanted the RGB slider. I wouldn't have to go over here to select it. I could just do it from the window. The Others menu is something we should definitely take note of once you first start drawing with the program. So go down here to Options. This is going to be the one that is the most useful. So usually it'll default to open to Tools. I was using Digitizer support earlier, so it defaulted to that in this instance. Be sure to check the Digitizer support submenu to make sure you have the pen selected rather than the mouse. You can also add some shortcuts to your pen with this submenu. It automatically detects which buttons your pen has and gives you the options to assign tools to them. I would definitely mess around with this and figure out which tools would be the most helpful for you to have quick access to using your pen. What I have assigned to mine on my other Sai, for example, is the eyedropper tool. I also set up a switch tool on one of the buttons, and let me show you what this does exactly. So as you can see, this button is my eyedropper, and this one is my switch tool. It defaults to the eraser because that was the tool that I was using before I pushed the other button, but it doesn't have to be the eraser. That's just how I use it the most often. You can pretty much change it to anything. So I've switched my eraser to brush, press the button, back to pen, back to brush. I just realized that I've been calling this tool the pen tool the entire time. It's not actually the pen tool, it's the pencil tool. My apologies. All right, that about sums up everything you'll want to know when using this program during our camps. Please let me know if you have any questions at all once we actually start, and I'd be happy to provide any support with this program. I hope you liked this tutorial and have found it helpful. I can't wait to see what you all make with it during our first couple of weeks.